Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for REL Appalachia's webinar on Principles of Innovation Configuration Mapping, also referred to as IC mapping. We thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. We know there are probably many other places you could be, but you chose to spend the next hour and a half with us, and we're really excited to share with you Principles of Innovation Configuration Mapping. I'm Stephanie Wilkerson. I'm a member of the REL Appalachia team and president of Magnolia Consulting. I'm going to spend a couple minutes giving you some background on the Regional Educational Laboratory program so you have context for our webinar today. The REL program is administered by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute of Education Sciences. There are 10 RELs across the country, and each REL serves a designated region, educators in a designated region, and works in partnership with the region's school districts, state departments of education, and others to use data and research to improve academic outcomes for students. It operates in a 5-year contract, and we're currently in year 4 of the contract. REL Appalachia meets the needs of educators in Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. The overarching goal is to build an evidence-reliant education system grounded in data and research. We do this by forming research alliances in each state. An alliance is a partnership where researchers and technical assistance providers and educators collaborate to address common education problems through ongoing studies and professional learning opportunities. Today's webinar is born out of a need in our Tennessee Alliance and Metro Nashville Public Schools. And the need there is for a tool that provides a clear roadmap of practices for collaborative data use. So we will be developing innovation configuration maps to meet this need. That brings us to the purpose of our webinar today. We will be going over an introduction of the concerns-based adoption model, which has 3 components. One of those components are the IC maps. So we will be talking about each of those briefly, and then move into a more in-depth discussion about the features and definitions of the IC maps. There will be an opportunity to see modeling of practice in developing IC maps, and we will wrap up after an hour and a half. If you want to share your excitement or learning about this event, you can tweet at REL_Appalachia or at education_AIR and use hashtag ICMaps. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters for today, Dr. Jason LeTurner and Dr. Dale Lewis with AIR.
We're going to start with some quick introductions. I'm Jason. I wanted to just give you a little background about myself. I've spent about 20 years evaluating a variety of different types of programs from pre-K through 16. Most recently, I've been here at CETL. Recently, we merged with AIR, so we're now AIR, but I've been here for about 4 years. I've done, again, a number of different evaluation type jobs. In particular, most recently, I was a evaluator at Austin Independent School District for about 4.5, 5 years. So really cut my teeth there working in a district. I'm a statistician by trade, and I like to say I'm kind of reformed because I've kind of given up some of my statistician ways, but really focusing more on technical assistance, in particular around CBAM. I worked a year-long project that we did for a district in Alabama, and that's where I really became familiar with CBAM myself, being new to CETL/AIR. And so that's really where I kind of cut my teeth on that. And just one thing I would like to say about myself, I really love good coffee and I like good running. And so whenever I travel, I like to combine those together and run to a coffee shop. So it's one thing about me.
Great. Thanks, Jason.
You bet.
So I'm Dale Lewis, and I've been here with CETL/AIR for the last 6 years. Before coming here, I've worked for 19 years in public education as a special education teacher and then a special education administrator. Currently, I oversee the Texas Comprehensive Center here at AIR, CETL/AIR. The Comprehensive Center is one of 15 such regional centers across the U.S. that provide technical assistance to state education agencies on key state initiatives. Here in Texas, we have key initiatives around teacher quality and low-performing schools that we're working on. As Jason mentioned, we've worked on several different CBAM projects together, and we regularly sit around and talk a little bit about implementation. And we've also had the privilege of working with a couple of the gurus of CBAM, Gene Hall and Shirley Horde. And that experience has really helped us build our own capacity with the model, including both of us becoming certified as levels of use interviewers and trainers. On the personal side, I've never been really too fond of beaches. You know, the scenery doesn't change a whole lot, and sand just really gets about everywhere. But I do very much love being in the mountains, so my vacations are usually spent somewhere north of Texas here.
So now you've heard a little bit about us. Today, again, as Stephanie alluded to, we're going to talk about the theory behind IC maps, which includes a touch on all three parts of CBAM. We'll then dive deeply into IC maps and how they're developed. And most importantly, we'll discuss how IC maps can be used to manage work as you seek to better understand and sustain a new initiative. I did want to point out that you were sent 3 handouts that hopefully you have downloaded and are on your machine or even printed out. One is a sample IC map that's blank. One is a sample IC map that's been filled out with, it's a sample IC map. And the other we'll refer to later is some guidance on how to build IC maps. So hopefully you've been able to get those from your email that should have been sent as one of the attendees of the meeting. So before we get started too much further, we wanted to get some information from you. So we're going to open up a poll, and basically we want you to respond to this question. So think about a time when you were part of something new. Which of the things have you done in the past to determine the level of implementation of a new program or a new practice? So if we could open the poll. So we'll give you 30 seconds or so to respond.
So we can read down the choices there, Jason.
Yeah, so one interesting one, ask everyone at a staff meeting how it's going and hope that you got honest responses. Another would be to ask perhaps a few key individuals and maybe generalize from there. Systematically monitored implementation using a research-based process. I know that sounds good. One that I know I've done plenty of times when I was at the district was assume that after some training and introduction, everyone was implementing the process. Trained and hoped is one that we've seen on occasion, and any other actions, and if you want to put those in the chat box. So the poll is generating your responses right now, and it'll be displayed here in a minute. There it is. So it looks like, well, that's great. It looks like the majority of y'all are probably right for some CBAM work because it is another way that you can systematically monitor implementation. Appreciate your honesty. I've definitely been prone to A, where I just ask folks at a staff meeting how things are going, and definitely E, trained and hoped. I know that's something that we all have seen for sure. So thanks for your response. We'll be doing polls throughout. Hopefully they won't be too difficult for you to come up with an answer, but just sort of wanted to get some feedback on where you all are at. So thank you for that. Great.
Okay, a little bit here on sort of the background behind IC maps and the theory of the concerns-based adoption model. We know that a lot of attention, certainly in the last 15 years since No Child Left Behind, has really been focused on identifying evidence-based practices, and less attention really has been directed toward understanding and supporting implementation. We know quite a bit, and really quite a lot about what works or what should work in education, but we've really not paid much attention to how we move what works into actual practice. And this really is kind of a long-standing problem in education. We adopt new programs, hopefully ones that have been proven to be effective with students similar to the ones that we serve. And we train our teachers on these programs, and then we expect them to implement them and get improved student outcomes. Often, all of that happening without a whole lot of additional support for those teachers that are implementing. And this really is where CBAM comes in. The concerns-based adoption model really has its place here at that nexus. So CBAM really recognizes that support for people implementing new programs or innovations is really crucial in helping us successfully move that program from being adopted into actual practice and really what we want, which are improved student results. So the graphic you see here depicts the 3 diagnostic dimensions of CBAM: innovation configuration maps, stages of concern, and levels of use. And then it also shows how they work together really to provide us with evidence of implementation and data that we can use and act on to support individuals and help move that implementation process forward in a positive and productive way. So today we're focusing on innovation configuration, or the IC map, but we thought it was important that we give you a little bit of a sense of how it fits into the larger CBAM model. So again, looking at the graphics, starting at the top and moving around clockwise, the innovation configuration map really describes the key components of a program and how they can be implemented so that we all have a common and clear picture of what that program is. Next, the stages of concern diagnostic dimension focuses on the affective side of change. It looks at how people are feeling about the new program and their attitudes toward it. Levels of use looks at the way people describe how they are using the program. For example, are they working independently or are they working with others? What does that work look like? Are they making adaptations to the program? If so, for what purpose are they making those adaptations? With information about people's behaviors and about their concerns, and with this IC map that gives us a clear picture of what a new program looks like when it's implemented well, we can really act very thoughtfully and intentionally in supporting others through change and toward better outcomes for kids.
So that was probably our heaviest slide of the day. It was rich, and we do like that graphic. We really feel like it kind of puts all the parts of CBAM together. And again, but most of the focus will be on IC maps today. But really thinking a little more generally about CBAM, it really helps us answer these three questions. What is it, what the thing is that we're working on? What is it? What does it do for me and others? And are people using it? And if so, how are they using it? So, but at the heart of CBAM, change is really the focus. We typically apply CBAM with an organization in which a new program is being implemented, but folks have also used it in, for example, if there's a new organizational structure or a new policy. We've seen it used around teacher appraisal quite a bit. Really, anytime people are in the middle of experiencing something new. We actually used it recently here at our shop in-house because there's a new technology that was being rolled out, and there's a lot of grousing and grumbling about it. And we said, well, hey, we do this CBAM thing. Perhaps we should apply some of that to in-house. We started doing interviews. We started doing some of that work, and basically we turned the grousing and grumbling into some action. So again, staying sideways a little bit on thinking broadly about CBAM. When I think about something new, I like to read everything I can about it, like this woman shown in this picture. She's been reading about this a while, and we're finally getting to do it. That might be one reaction that someone has to something new. Another action might be, this one makes me laugh. What did they say, and they want me to do what? I'm sure you've worked with folks who feel that way about something new. And last, I think I got it, but I need a little more explanation on that. And so the reason we present these three sample questions regarding when someone's dealing with something new is that it's really important to determine if those implementing are able to understand what the program is, whether everyone has the same idea about what the program looks like in practice. As we definitely know, even when people have attended the same orientation or training, they may come away with some very different ideas about what it looks like in practice. So these questions are the crux of what we answer with innovation configuration maps. And to address this problem by providing a clear picture of the behavioral expectations when you implement a new process or program, I like to say we actually define what it is.
So on the affective side of change, that emotions and attitudes, as people are really faced with implementation of a new program or some new initiative, they'll likely experience a range of emotions. So maybe feelings of excitement and motivation that were possibly stirred up at a kickoff meeting or a training session might eventually give way to concerns or worries about how that new initiative is really going to affect me personally. How will I be able to manage something else added to my already full plate? If the concerns that I have about how the initiative is going to affect me personally and maybe my ability to be successful with it, if those concerns are addressed, possibly by maybe helping me map out a plan to gradually incorporate the new initiative into my routine, if those are addressed, my initial concerns that were focused on myself should lessen in intensity and might shift towards concerns about how the initiative is affecting my students and their outcomes. So the stages of concern dimension gives us or helps us address the feelings and emotions that often surface during an improvement initiative. And it helps us support and guide others through that change process. So in rolling out a new program or initiative, we've had some questions, like Jason said, about what it is, and then we just looked at some concerns about people might have around implementing it and how it might affect us individually. And now we turn our attention to whether or not someone is actually using the new program, and if so, how is it being used? Here we see a teacher who, for one reason or another, apparently is not using the same reading program as the other fifth grade teachers. You know, maybe he's taking time to learn more about it, but at least according to one of his students here, he's definitely not doing what everyone else is doing. In this example, we have teachers collaborating about a formative assessment component of some new program or initiative. Not only are they apparently using the program, but they are also coordinating their efforts to explore and experiment with ways that might improve student outcomes. This is definitely a different level of use than that teacher we saw a minute ago who may not have even opened a box of reading program materials. And it's definitely different than one who's working independently to implement this. So using the levels of use interview protocol can help us uncover the extent to which individuals are using a new program or innovation, and then help them move in sort of improving that use.
So that was a quick overview of the three dimensions of CBAM. And we do want you to be very aware that it's totally cool to put something in the chat or put something in the Q&A question for us. We will be monitoring it, and Stephanie and Jennifer will also be monitoring it. So feel free to ask questions that you might have of us. I know on lots of webinars, people say, feel free to ask us questions, and then some folks don't necessarily feel comfortable doing it, but we're definitely wanting a conversation, so feel free to do that with any questions you have. That said, we're going to ask you another question at this point. Now, I know we did give you just a brief introduction, but if you could, again, sort of step sideways, and if you could tell us how familiar you are with CBAM. Hopefully you're figuring out the acronym since we've just talked about it a little bit. Some of you may know a little bit about CBAM but need more information. You might be a huge fan of one of the tools but didn't know about the others. You might know quite a bit about CBAM, but perhaps you want to learn how to use it in different ways. And Paul and Horde, who we mentioned earlier, are my godparents. That would be sort of the
that's the pinnacle.
The pinnacle of CBAM. So again, we'll have the survey open for about 30 seconds, and it'll be generating the responses that we have from y'all. Dale mentioned it. I don't know if y'all know Shirley Horde. She does quite a bit of work with Learning Forward, and she does live here in Austin, so we get to see her quite a bit. Oh, wow. So came back. 100% of the respondents said, I know a little bit about CBAM but want more information.
Oh, good. Well,
cool. Well, you're in the right spot for that today, for sure. So a quick definition of CBAM that I just sort of wanted to elaborate on. So the concerns-based adoption model consists of three diagnostic dimensions. And what I really like about that first bit is that it's diagnostic. You really are using data to inform your practice. That provide evidence, again, I like the word evidence, of the current extent and quality of implementation. So you're diagnosing based on evidence, and that's what's cool about this process. Then, most importantly, that leaders can use to drive decisions and action. Having spent much of my life in the research field doing research on all sorts of things, I was always frustrated with, well, how do we turn this research into actual practice for folks to use in the field? I really feel like that's one of the things I really like about CBAM is that it allows leaders at many levels to actually turn data into action to support their staff and support change. So moving on, again, feel free to ask questions. I wanted to give you a little history lesson on CBAM. So I'm looking at the chat right now because I want someone of the 25 attendees to tell me when they think CBAM started. So this is a picture of the original CBAM crew. So we're going to wait here for a second, and if one of y'all could put in the chat box when you think CBAM began based on this picture.
1903. All right. Thanks, Marty.
1903. 1983. That's actually a little closer. Early 90s. That's interesting, Letitia. Actually, Katie, it is.
Katie's probably almost.
It's more like the 70s. To be honest, hey, thanks, Laura, 1984. I think this picture was taken in the early 80s, but the work did begin in the 70s. You can see Archie George in the back with that big beard, which has become popular again. And then a couple folks, thanks all for participating. A couple folks that you may recognize are Gene Hall and Shirley Hord. We mentioned them. Gene is in the right of that picture, at your right in the blue turtleneck, and Shirley is behind the B there. Shirley still looks, I don't know how old she is, but she's still kicking. She's still cruising along. So those folks really, there was a team, but really Hall and Hord were sort of the fundamental founders of where we started. A good point, Margie. I think the hairstyles are a little more 80s. Not that I have to worry about that anymore, but that's all right. So basically, Gene and Shirley started their work at University of Texas in Austin. Again, that's where our offices are, in the Research and Development Center for Teacher Education. So they had a couple different large grants, including a regional education lab, one of the old school regional education labs, similar to REL Appalachia that we're working with today. And so the labs in that center came together, provided some funding, and they did quite a bit of work on CBAM while at UT. And then ultimately, Shirley came and moved to Seattle, spent about 15 years here with us. And so that's how basically CBAM came to Seattle. So a little bit of a history lesson there. The thing I liked about it, though, and it was kind of old school research in the 70s and 80s before there were computers that could do everything. All of the tools are really created from a very sound statistical research base. They basically did research on it for 3 years before they came to the point of having something that they were ready to start using. And what's interesting is they started with the stages of concern and the levels of use. And what they were finding is they'd go out and they'd talk to people about how they're interacting with something, or they'd talk to people with how they're using it, and they're collecting all this data. But what they were finding as they interviewed people about an innovation is all the people had different ideas of what it was. Hey, we're doing this new program. It has to do with, some sort of reading, and they would come back with completely different ideas about what the program was. So ultimately, in the 80s, they created a third component of CBAM, which is the IC mapping process, where they really said, hey, we got to describe what it is before we can start asking these other things. So that's a little history lesson. Thanks much.
Good. Great. So the key really that holds it together is the IC map, providing really that picture of what the innovation is. All right. Once again, you see our graphic that displays the 3 diagnostic dimensions of CBAM. And then together, these 3 provide us with some specific information about implementation, help us decide what improvements might need to be made, what actions we should take that can help move us forward in our implementation journey. So these tools provide insight into that quality of implementation and the feelings and behaviors of people on the front line of change.
So I know we've already talked about it a bit, but this to me is just the critical aspect of all 3 components. Is you don't necessarily need all 3 for evidence of implementation, but it's just data that's used for good and not just data for some research study. And so that's what I find most exciting about the CBAM work.
Good. Thanks. So we have built in some time where we could respond to questions. So I don't know at this point that we have any, Jason, in the chat or the Q&A. But we can pause for a moment.
Yeah, we'll pause for a minute. Everybody, I don't know, you're probably doing phone checks as it is, but just pause for 10 or 15 seconds. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in. If not, just take a little mental break for a second.
Yeah. I think we can probably go on, Jason. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Keep those questions. Get them out. We'll have another place here in just a little bit where we'll stop again and pause and see if there are any questions.
So y'all may have heard we had quite a bit of rain here in Austin and the surrounding areas the last 2 weeks, and it's been a little tragic with some folks being caught up in the floods. But there's actually a huge storm outside our windows that we're hearing. We really hope, Jennifer and Stephanie, that we don't lose power, but it's looking a little ominous. So I'm sure we'll be fine, but
okay.
Anyways, yeah, it'll all be good.
Don't worry.
All right, I won't worry. Well, I'll worry a little bit, but not too much.
Okay, we'll move on then. We're going to kind of talk a little bit now more in depth about IC maps, since that is our focus today. Once again, here's our graphic. This time we're highlighting that innovation configuration map dimension. Remember, it provides us a clear picture, clear description of the innovation, the new program, the new practice. So let's take a look at how an IC map can actually be used. It can be used in lots of different ways, actually. So first, researchers can use the IC map to help address the need to document and ensure high-quality implementation before they actually look at the effects or impacts of various treatments, approaches, and practices. As an example, researchers that maybe are studying a new reading program could use the IC map to help ensure that the teachers assigned to an experimental group or treatment group are delivering the program as it was intended, and that they do indeed differ from those teachers who are assigned to the control group. Another use of the IC map is in dissemination. For example, continuing with our reading program example, instructional coaches who are possibly supporting the implementation of that new reading program could use the IC map with the teachers that they assist to help communicate descriptions of key practices that are tied to the core components of that reading program.
Third item, one of the things I actually like, Dale mentioned the dissemination. One thing I've discovered with IC maps is it's really just a useful tool to talk about what the thing is.
Sure.
So I really enjoy that a lot. I think that's important. As far as professional learning goes, it really can be something that if teachers are implementing, let's say, again, the new reading program, they could use IC maps as a reflective tool that is part of their professional learning. They could help them see where they are relative to a continuum of increased skill and proficiency. And more importantly, a leader, as I've already alluded to, could use the map to inform what aspects of the program he or she might focus on, and also where there are some professional development opportunities, again, using data to inform their practice. Last, probably my favorite thing, since I'm sort of an evaluator at heart, although I said earlier I'm reformed, I think, but IC maps can be used when evaluating the program or initiative itself. So again, continuing with our reading example, the maps can be used when observing instruction in classrooms where the program is being used, and the aggregate data from all of these classrooms could be used to assess the quality of implementation of key program components. So that's one way. It's a little more challenging. It requires an extra round of data collection, but it is one thing we've seen used very well in districts in particular, where the folks that are collecting the evaluation data are district staff, principals, things like that. So time for another poll, making sure everybody's still there. We were just wondering, thinking about the 4 uses that we just described, how might you apply it in your work? And it's okay to respond with more than one answer.
There we go. So there's the question. You can see it. Thinking about those 4 uses, research, dissemination, professional learning, and evaluation, how might you apply it in your work? Which one? Research? Or you actually, again, like Jason said, you can multi-select here as well. Let's see how people might think about using it. I think the most frequent way I've seen it used is in dissemination.
Yep.
And it's probably because we've been more involved with sort of early implementation efforts when we've supported individuals. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So that's exactly how most people here have think about they might use it in dissemination. Certainly the most probably the most significant way it can be used, and just really to develop and build an understanding among all people about what the program is. That clear communication is obviously very important. As I say regularly, most of our problems stem from communication issues. So good. Thanks. A lot of people also, professional learning, excellent use. I think certainly in this day and age when we think about shifts in teacher evaluation and support systems, and how I know here in Texas they're focusing much more heavily on professional learning and growth of teachers. So definitely a very important tool helping teachers set goals and plan for their own professional learning.
So again, thanks for that feedback. We appreciate that. So I always like to give some shout-outs to Hall and Horde, who we've already given you pictures of and called the Godfather and Godmother. But we also work with Gene Hall quite a bit still. So again, we're blessed that we can do that. But really, again, I mean, we've already sort of talked about it already. But what this is showing, especially the last part, is when teachers or others are experiencing something new, one of the real problems is a lack of clarity about what they're being asked to do. Exactly. What is it that you want me to do? We ask that question a lot. We're going through this merger here, and there are a lot of times where it's just like someone needs to tell me what it is that I'm supposed to do.
It's true. We're a case study.
We would be a great case study.
Yeah.
So we want you to now take a little mental journey. We don't necessarily need you to put anything in the chat box, but I want you to imagine a backyard swing. So I hope you're all imagining that. If you were here in person, we could see if your faces are looking thoughtful or not. But so again, taking a little mental trip. I'm giving you a couple seconds. So make it the most enjoyable swing that you can imagine. And I have to tell you, for me, I'm picturing a swing that has a receptacle for holding a cold beverage of some sort. And it's funny, my brother used to swing me on swings so high that I would get sick. So that's my big brother. So I would need a swing that had like some limiter so it couldn't actually swing too high. So that would be my ideal swing, cold beverage and something that can't swing that high. How about you, Dale?
How about, well, certainly, I guess a swing for two people.
Well,
maybe at our house, room for the dog as well on that swing.
That would be nice.
Or maybe one that could go upside down and around the pole.
No.
I think that would be very cool.
That would not be good for me. So I want you, as we move forward, to actually keep that ideal swing, the picture that you have, in your mind. Sort of that is the ideal form. So one common mistake, as we said, when people plan something is they don't begin with a clear understanding of what it is they are intending to accomplish. So, for example, in the swing idea, we have this ideal picture in our heads. But if we went and talked to a whole bunch of people about it, it's going to vary quite a bit. So thinking about our swing, let's look at some illustrations that speak to this need for clarity in describing what it is that we're trying to accomplish, keeping the end in mind.
Okay. So here's an example, a picture of the swing that was proposed by the project sponsor. And here's a variation that was specified in the project request.
This one makes me uncomfortable, by the way. Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd want to swing on that.
Right.
And here's how it was designed by the senior analyst.
Okay. Yep.
As proposed by the programmer. As installed at the user's site itself. And then last, here's really what the users want. So CBAM provides us with a tool, the IC map, that can capture and communicate our vision of the ideal accomplishment as well as possibilities that might be less than ideal. So let's continue with our example here to clarify our vision of this ideal backyard swing. Take another look at the illustration, and what key features or critical parts of the swing do you see? So you may have thought about these key features. A seat.
Yeah, Margie's got a rope. That's true.
A rope.
There we go. Seat.
Oh, Margie's knocking them off. And maybe a support. Let's look at the first feature that's listed, a seat. The user really wanted a tire, but other possible variations included seats with 1 or 3 planks. So we now know the possible variations in swing seat design and also which variation matches the ideal in the eyes of the children who will be using the swing. How about configurations for the rope? Well, variations for it include 1, 2, or 3 ropes. And finally, the third component, support. There were 3 possible variations for it. 1 branch, 2 branches, or the tree trunk itself, which is probably not a very ideal variation. So now we kind of have a clearer picture of what the users really wanted. And had the swing developer been given this written picture in advance of his work, he or she might have done a better job of meeting the user's vision of the ideal backyard swing. In CBAM, we call the key features of a program or innovation components. In our swing example, the components are a seat, a rope, and some type of support. And then the possible configurations of these components are called variations and include both ideal variations and those that are less than ideal. So in building IC maps, identifying the core components of an innovation and working to flesh out the behaviors that describe how these core components are implemented are key to crafting a solid IC map.
So just to reemphasize, again, those are two words we'll be using today. I know we're coming to see some of y'all in Metro Nashville. These are a couple really key things. If you were in person, I'd be seeing if you were really getting the idea that components and variations are two critical ideas that we have in the ICMAP process. So hopefully those are pretty clear at this point. It's kind of cool because we just built an ICMAP around swings, basically, with components and variations. In its simplest form, though, when we think about an innovation configuration map, it's really just a map. It's a word map, though, instead of a picture map like this Google image that you see here. It can tell you how to get from your destination, where you start, to ideal implementation, showing various options along the way. So when I think about, for example, traveling from Austin to Nashville, where we'll be with some of y'all next week, I like to think about maps. Obviously, we're going to be flying. We're not going to be driving. We could drive, though. I don't know if I'd want that long of a road trip with Dale, but yeah. But a map, an IC map, again, is like a Google map on your phone. It's very analogous. It essentially tells you a few different ways to get there, the ideal way, a couple ways that might take a little longer, and most importantly for me, it would show you things that are essential, like where you can get gas, also where you can get Mountain Dew and Cheetos, which is an essential part of any road trip, right? So essentially, when I think about an IC map, it really is a map, and this is a good example of that. So I want to take, again, a little work for you where you picture in your mind a classroom, and again, thinking about the swing, sort of analogous to the swing. What in your own or your child's classroom, perhaps something you've seen on TV, I think we've all probably been in a classroom somewhat recently, what are some key physical components of the classroom that you picture? So if you could put in the chat box some of the key components as you're thinking and sort of visualizing this classroom, what are some of the key components that you would see?
Okay, so we see some comfortable seating for the students. Definitely some materials.
So seats is a definite theme. That would probably be a component. Materials. Ooh, I like that smartboard idea.
Yeah, the projector, computer, some kind of configuration of desks. Good. Certainly today, technology, definitely more and more technology in classrooms, hands-on activities. Bookshelves. Great. These are great responses. Certainly, definitely key things that we'd see in
laptops.
So let's take one of those. Why don't we take, someone suggested it, Susan suggested configuration of desks. Can we take the desks and think about what kinds of different ways can desks be configured in a classroom? What are the different variations that we might see?
So you're saying a key component would be desks or seating. Right. Maybe seating would be the general. And then what are some, if we could go ahead and respond in the chat, what would be some variations of that seating that you might see?
Sure. Horseshoe shape or circles, excellent. U-shaped, So certainly different arrangements of the desks that may be for different purposes.
Yeah, desks clustered, so at basically small tables.
Sure, so you can kids work in smaller groups, excellent.
Karen, we do see straight rows, or groups. Yeah, lots of options to the rows. I like Susan's comment, and that would be part of potentially an IC map that you'd build, would be thinking about the intention of the lesson.
Yeah.
One thing that's kind of cool about IC maps, we'll mention in a minute, is that it's possible, of course, that more than one variation is good. It's not necessarily that all the variations are structured from ideal to less than ideal. Sometimes a bunch of variations might be good. Usually you have an ideal, depending on, as Susan said, the intention of the lesson.
Yeah.
But it's possible that a number of ways might be good, and that's part of the IC map process.
Great, yeah. So focusing on the intention of the lesson, how we might use different seating arrangements to support that in my CMAP is an excellent way to kind of vary that across a continuum.
Why don't we do one more? A couple of you put whiteboards. I'm curious, we thought about this a little bit, the method for the teacher writing or showing or demonstrating. I know I've seen a number of different things in classrooms. Could we think about whiteboards would be one of the variations. What other ways might teachers give information to their students besides writing on a whiteboard?
Visual information?
Yeah, visual information. I'm sorry. Thanks, Dale. Visual information. So we'll take a minute for y'all to respond to that.
And thank you for responding. We appreciate that.
Yeah, excellent participation. Digital projector. Oh, so Letitia, basically, what are ways that the teacher could give visual information to students? Manipulative could be one. I was saying that folks use a whiteboard. Handouts would be another one, right? Handouts would probably be, depending on the activity, less than ideal, but sometimes they'd be exactly what you need. Oh, Elmo. I like that.
Yeah, using Elmo. Mobus, that's a new one on me, Mobus. Jason?
TV. Moby. Nobody put the chalkboard, but the chalkboard's kind of gone.
They're kind of obsolete anymore.
Every once in a while they're just covered with paper that you use instead of the chalkboard. Again, so you're totally getting it. I mean, we basically built a couple different. Yeah, I know, Marty. They don't really have them anymore. So it goes.
Probably no chalk either, right?
Right. Oh, that's true.
Yep.
Bad industry to be in, I guess. Chalk.
Okay.
All right, enough of that. We're digressing. We tend to do that too a little bit. But basically what we just did was built out a couple components with variations of what a classroom would look like.
Very simple.
So really, really good job on that. So next question, again, is kind of a slightly heavier thought, and we just want to, again, give you a couple minutes to think about this.
Based on what you know now.
Right. How might an IC map assist you in your work? We asked you talked about it being good for professional learning or communication. Can you think of a specific example in your work that you might be able to use an IC map for? Again, we're about to tell you in great detail how to build one, but we just sort of wanted you to reflect at this point on ways that an IC map might be useful for you as you go about your work. Again, we'll take a minute and have a look at some responses. All right, what are we getting? It does help you focus, Gina, for sure. And, I like Margie again, your common language and a roadmap.
So important. Yeah, definitely. Susan, excellent point in terms of
that's something we mentioned. But
onboarding new staff.
Yep.
I mean, every year, right, we have turnover in education if we're talking about school systems, new staff coming in the door, and we've got a program that we're continuing. How do we onboard those staff? How do we get them up to speed on what the program is? Excellent use of an IC map. Katie, that's a nice point there in terms of structure for feedback. So using the IC map to guide some feedback provided to teachers of those that are using it.
And Karen, what I liked about your comment is how to best implement these standards or something new. What I again appreciate about the IC map is it always sort of gives you the ideal or what you aspire to, but it's not a gotcha. It's not about evaluating the individual. It's about basically the program or the group, and so it's helping you aspire to potentially ways to best implement something that's new.
Great.
And for sure, it's good on collaboration. Just a good place to start talking. Here's what this thing is. Here's what we believe is the ideal, and we definitely want that tire, not those 3 planks. And so that's the kind of conversations that you can have around that. Thank you very much. Again, we're monitoring the chat box, but if you have specific questions that you want us to answer, you can put those in that Q&A. You can also put them in the chat box, I guess, and we can grab them. But feel free to put something in Q&A, or we'll give you our contact information later. And anytime you have a question day or night, you can email us, and we'll get back to you pretty quick. So I wanted to go through the steps in developing an IC map. This is definitely a crash course, but we did give you the handout, steps in developing an IC map. Feel free to, again, ask questions or take notes, as there's quite a bit of info here. But we wanted to basically give you the 6 steps that there are that we sort of go through when we develop an IC map. So first, this is my favorite part, as people around here know. I love ideas and ideation, as they call it in Strengths Finders, but I really like to visualize, brainstorm, and explore. And that's definitely one of the critical things that you want to do, that you want to start with. Ideally, if you have access to someone who's developed the program or who's rolling it out, I would talk to them to find out more about the program. On the steps handout on the back, we have some questions that you might want to ask. But really, it's interesting when you ask somebody who's developed a program, not just, hey, what do you think is the ideal that will happen, but what else might be happening with someone implementing your program. It can be a really rich experience, and you can find out quite a bit about the program through this first step. Second, sort of like we did with the swing in the classrooms, you want to fairly quickly start to identify, again, it can be a draft, but some key components that are the major operational features of the practice. We have lots of thumb wrestling contests about how many features you should focus on, how many are considered major, but a couple things to consider. It's really hard to think about, if you think about the life cycle of a year at a school district or a school, to think about more than 5 or 6 main components. It's possible that you might have 10 that are critical. We just recommend that you sort of parking lot some, or you build the whole map out, but when you're communicating on it, you'd only really focus on 5 or 6 of them. So feel free to develop them all, but have some maybe primary ones and then some secondary ones. I mean, I once did a map like this, and I was so proud of it because it took an entire cube wall, literally. It was literally hanging in my cube. But basically, it was impossible to examine all the parts. So while it was a good exercise, I think it's really important to keep some focus. So in that regard, you as experts and in your groups, you decide on what's most important. You're going to hear this from us many times, and it's that you want to couch everything you have, the components and the variations, in verbs. So it's really important when you construct the map that it should be behaviors that you can observe. So what are people that are charged with implementing the program actually doing? So that's really important to use verbs. Next is to consider the sequence. This is kind of interesting to me. We consider it a key step because especially some of y'all talk specifically about communication and how that's an important aspect of IC mapping. But it's really important to maybe pair some things together or put the most important things first, especially when you think about marketing this document to other folks. It's really important to consider which of the key components you'd want to put first. Would you want to put the tire swing, the platform first, or the rope first? Depending on who you're talking to, you might want to switch that around. Step 5 is where you get sort of nitty-gritty and you work on the variations. A variation, as we've alluded to, should really be based on something that people are doing, those who are implementing the program. What's interesting and different about this is variations typically, and we'll show you an example in a second, go from ideal to less than ideal. And sometimes there are a couple variations that are sort of ideal. So the idea is that it's really based on what you're observing in the classroom. So in some cases, one thing may not be necessarily quote-unquote better than the other, but you typically have an ideal, which is on the left side of the document, and you move over to less than ideal, which is on the right side of the document. Again, Dale's going to show you in just one second. As I said, really need to describe actions that you can observe. And importantly, you need to be able to see if this is something that's going on in the classroom. You need to be able to observe and see this actually happening. So you want to use words that are descriptive, that people can understand, not things like didactic, phenomenological, instructional awareness or something like that. I just made that one up. No, I hope I didn't offend anybody with that one. But use words in this map that make sense to folks. Again, another little tricky thing we'll show you that the reason I have number can vary is that for some of the key components you might have 5 variations and some you might have 4 variations, which is very different than rubrics, things like that, which is typically all the same. So in a district we worked in recently, I actually used the term wash, rinse, repeat is what you want to do with an IC map, and not everyone got that right away. I'm sure all of y'all are knowing that's what's on the back of a shampoo bottle. We had someone, I think, from another country who didn't quite get that. But basically, the idea is you want to review and refine and reapply, similar to the wash, rinse, repeat idea. You want to understand that that an IC map is a working draft, that it's really a living document. So, for example, in our work, we met with teachers and coaches initially. In the district work we did recently, they drafted some really drafty IC maps and then took them to their campuses. That's when they really tested them and started making them a little better. Came back together. We found that there was much to change. So basically the idea that you really want to do this step 6 potentially multiple times where you review the work, you refine it, and then reapply or re-examine, redo, that sort of thing. And so we think that that's just really important to understand that it's a process. It's a living document.
Sure, and really, the developmental process is iterative. It really is never done. You probably want to come back to it at least annually to revisit, see if your learnings have informed maybe further refinements in the IC.
Thanks, Dale.
Yep.
So I alluded already to this idea. We get this question quite a bit. Isn't an IC map just a rubric? And some of the old-timers, Dale and I aren't them yet, but really get cranky. It is not a rubric. Well, we can see the similarities, but we also see some differences. I think part of it, they're both effective when they're shared with others, whether it's the learners or the implementers. And also, I think for both of them, typically key users are involved in the development, and they do help to communicate things that are important and give awareness. But there are some key differences.
Yeah. So some of those key differences are, for example, in a rubric, the order of levels is distinct and it's ranked, but variations on an IC map, at least with the exception of ideal and unacceptable variations, may not necessarily be in any kind of ranked order. There may not be a way to rank order some of those variations in the middle. So as an example, the order of, say, 2 reading program variations, maybe one variation that focuses on, say, foundational reading skills, and another variation focusing on reading strategy instruction. Those might be equally important and probably are equally important and really could be placed on either side of each other on the IC map. But probably the biggest differences between IC maps and rubrics are that rubrics are used typically to evaluate individuals' work, and they result in some kind of score or grade, while the IC map is used to evaluate a program, not people. That's key. And it really leads to some kind of action.
So I was going to type in the box. I'll just say it out loud. That's, again, really important and critical. The IC map is not about evaluating individual performance. It's not about a gotcha. It's about evaluating the program or evaluating the health of the school doing the program. And here's what we need to do as a group to improve our practice. It's definitely not about evaluating the teacher or coming up with a grade.
Yeah, and we really can't overemphasize that enough. And certainly out in the field, we kind of belabor it sometimes, but really must focus on program evaluation, because once individuals start looking at the IC map as individual performance evaluation, you really lose the beauty of the thing and the benefit of getting actionable data.
And y'all who are attending today, the focus y'all said was about dissemination, communication, professional learning. Yeah, so as opposed to evaluation, we appreciate that very much. So we're about to go through a bit of a heavy lift. Dale's going to lead it.
Some questions.
My bad. Any questions? We'll take a minute. Again, give you all a 30-second pause break. Look at your phones. Maybe you're doing that already. But just if there are any questions in the Q&A or in the chat box, we're happy to ask them. You're welcome, Martin.
Yeah.
It's funny, when I first started the work, I thought they were kind of the same, and the old-timers, in the best way, kind of ground that out of me. They're not really the same, and they are similar, but the intent is different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Should we move on then, Jason, you think?
Sure. Again,
we'll pick them up if there are more questions that come in. So if you're typing one in, feel free to go ahead and finish, even though we go on. We will come back and
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about practice, about developing an IC map. It's actually kind of difficult to practice building an IC map during a webinar, but what we're going to do then is we're going to look at these next slides as kind of an exercise in visualization. Jason, you raised your hand.
Dale's right. It is difficult to do it for real, which is what we're about to do, but we did it very well in theory, I think, with the swing and with the classroom example. Basically, y'all built IC maps using something that was sort of straightforward. So
we're going to kind of give you the images this time and kind of walk you through sort of the the major components in developing an IC map. And you also, in your handouts there, just to remind you, you have a good example, a pretty good example of an IC map that probably or ideally will reflect some of the elements that we're going to touch on here. So it's that IC map for instructional coaches that you have. So here we have an example of an IC map that's for differentiated instruction. You can see that in the title at the top. And it's in its early stages of development here. You'll note that in addition to that title that I just mentioned, the IC map includes a notation that this document is a working draft. It's important that you realize that IC maps and the people realize that IC maps are living documents that will change, and they should change over time as they're used and refined. In school settings, though, we recommend that this refinement occurs annually so that individuals that are using the map are not having to adjust to changing expectations during the course of the school year.
One thing I appreciate about the working draft point is I'm kind of a stickler for stuff, and I'll get kind of cranky about things, especially if there's some sort of continuum of quality, and I'll ask questions like, what about this or what about that? And the thing with an IT map, if I'm presenting one to somebody, I'll say, that's a very good point. We should incorporate that into our draft. I mean, so it is this iterative process. So it takes a little pressure off of you, like, oh, I got to have the perfect one, because the idea is it's not. It's a draft, and you're continually learning about it, its quality based on what you see in the field. So thanks, Neil.
All right, so back to our example map here. Moving on, you'll also notice that this IC map is specific to teacher behaviors, and that there are two components, at least that we can see displayed right here, provides a high-quality core curriculum and creates a learner-centered classroom. So now looking more closely at the two variations, on the left we see a clear set of behaviors that describe what a teacher does to provide high-quality core curriculum. The teacher uses a curriculum that's aligned to state standards, and they also use research-based supplementary materials that support the required text. Over on the right, you see a description of a behavior that is less than ideal if the teacher is working to implement differentiated instruction. That being the teachers relying solely on the textbook and publisher materials to provide and guide all instruction.
One thing, obviously, we started with ideal and least ideal, but obviously you'd have to create those too. So a true IC map would start with nothing. Yeah, obviously.
Be that blank page.
Yeah, the blank page.
All right. So now moving from left to right, or from the least
right to
the from right to left.
Yeah.
Sorry. From right to left, thank you, Jason.
You
From
bet.
the least desirable to the most desirable behavior, let's go ahead and build out some additional variations for providing high-quality core curriculum between those two extremes. So in this variation, we see that we've added the use of supplementary materials, which is certainly more than only relying on the publisher materials, but note that the supplementary materials used may not be research-based, as is described in that ideal variation on the far left. In this next variation, we include teacher reflection on the linkage of self-selected supplementary materials to the state standards. And in the variation that is closest to the ideal, the use of a curriculum that's aligned to state standards is added. So what you should take away from this example is how the variations build upon one another, moving from right to left, such that the key aspects of the ideal variation, and in this case those are curriculum aligned to state standards, use of research-based supplementary materials, and a district-adopted textbook, that those key aspects are used to differentiate teacher behaviors across this continuum. So, but before we leave this example, a couple of additional pointers on building IC maps. First, the descriptions of the variation should emphasize, as we've said already, actions of the person who's the focus of the IC map. So make sure that you use very good descriptive verbs. Then second, it's important to note that to the far right, that least ideal variation, that it's not simply described as the absence of the ideal. So it's not described as does not use the curriculum aligned to state standards, but instead it focuses on, in this case, what the teacher is doing instead of using an aligned curriculum.
That was really sort of a mind-blowing thing for me when I realized that the IC map in its least, what it's identifying as least acceptable or least desirable is still something. Teachers are doing something.
Right. It's not so.
Yeah, and so the idea is you're still describing what is happening in the classroom, just not what you hope to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're going to spend a little bit of time. Looks like we're doing well on schedule. A little bit of time talking about some of the lessons that we've learned in the places that we've worked, and we're going to draw on some lessons in Alabama. It's fairly close to Tennessee and to Nashville, where we'll be next week. So we always take away lessons learned in our work with clients. We're all about continuous improvement ourselves here. So part of the work that we did in Alabama resulted in that IC map for instructional coaches that you have as one of your handouts. And in the IC map work in Alabama, we feel that it really was greatly benefited from the involvement of the coaches and teachers in its development, and I think Jason mentioned that earlier. Having the experiences of those coaches and those teachers and their voices reflected in the IC map greatly increased their ownership and enthusiasm about the work in building the IC map, and also really about the initiative that they were rolling out.
Some of those conversations are pretty hot, though, too. I really enjoyed having teachers with principals, with district staff, really working hard on something, and that was powerful just by itself. But, yeah, really important to have those people in the room. Yep.
Another important lesson that we took away, and actually is one that we really kind of already knew, but it was sort of reinforced in Alabama, was that it takes time to build a decent IC map. It's not something that you can do sort of over the weekend or in a one work session with a group of people. It does take some time. It's going to go through probably at least 2 or 3 iterations before it's even ready for its initial use as a draft. And we must all remember that, kind of in that spirit of continuous improvement, it's never going to be perfect. It should be refined over time and informed by our experiences and how we reflect on what we've learned from its use.
Well, this is interesting. I'm realizing the lessons learned from an urban district that we worked with here in Texas were all things that y'all have already responded to as being something that might be useful for an IC map. So good job. Way to write my slide presentation for me. I appreciate that. But basically, y'all said this already, but what we really learned in practice was that it does define expectations for campuses and staff. So it's very comforting to know what it is that they're supposed to be doing, as we mentioned earlier. And particularly staff that are doing it helps them get a handle on their work. I like having sort of an aspiration for myself. Hey, this would be the next thing I could do. And sometimes the ideal seems so far away. How could I ever, become a perfectly proficient Excel user? Well, how about I start with some, let's say baby steps. And that's one thing the IC map does too, is it gives you sort of some intermediate places you can go. So that second bullet there, I think it really helps program staff get a handle on their work, and from that professional learning idea, what it is that they could do next. And I can't remember who said it exactly, but totally allows new staff to better understand what's going on. And that's real important. Bill.
Yeah, I had something there I was going to say. Let's see. Getting a better handle on the work. I don't know. Go ahead. It'll come to me, Jason.
Okay. Dale will hop in just a minute. We don't have a problem interrupting each other for sure. Last, just a couple of sort of general ideas, some general lessons learned, and we've said it already. It's really a program tool, not an individual evaluation. I think that, again, was one of those things. I was so used to building rubrics for folks that, weren't necessarily gotchas. We all, of course, all did it with good intentions, but it became sort of a, very much an evaluation thing of individuals. And what's cool, and this is part of the messaging that we do, is it's about the program. And last, and I've said this, probably half a dozen times, and it's kind of what keeps me coming back for CBAM work, is that it's data that informs our action. So that's what's really important. One last little thing, and Dale, I think, had a comment, but we don't necessarily have any problem with people trying to build IC maps, but some IC maps that are called IC maps out there might really be a rubric. They're definitely not the sort of thing, some of the things we've seen on the web, where we'd have this idea of this gradual change over time. It might be rubrics where it's 20% this, 40% that, instead of actually observing what people are doing in classrooms. So sometimes we see things called IC maps that are really just rubrics. But we really think that IC maps can be useful to clearly communicate the ways that a key component of an innovation is being implemented. It can be something to aspire to. We like the process. But if you do ever come across an IC map and you're like, hey, is this a good one or not? Feel free to send it to us. we're happy to comment on it. We know that our fair organization, Learning Forward, that we work with has some IC maps that are just really big and really heavy and really, like we said earlier, hard to sort of wrap your head around how large those can be. So again, some of the work we'll be doing with Metro Nashville coming up will be hopefully focusing on some really efficient, agile, useful IC maps, and so we're excited about that opportunity. Any other thoughts, Dale?
So I just remembered what I was going to say a minute ago. The nice thing about the Innovation Configuration Map is that it really respects sort of the developmental nature of change.
Oh, that's a good point.
When people are initially trained in, say, the implementation of a new program, oftentimes it seems that the expectation is that, the next day when they're rolling it out in the classroom, they're rolling it out at 100%, that all the aspects are going to be implemented, and that's just not realistic. And so the IC map really communicates that there are some acceptable variations, across or along this path of development as we refine our use and as we learn and become comfortable with these new programs and these changes. So I think it is important really to respect the developmental nature of change, and certainly CBAM in general does that, but IC maps in particular are a nice tool for that. Jason?
So again, we want to pause for any questions. We're definitely, I think, going to probably wrap a little early, which never hurts. We all get our 20 minutes back to, I don't know, do something. For us, it'll be go look at the weather outside. But we just, again, pause if you have any questions or comments for the good of the cause. Stephanie has a few more slides, and we have a wrap-up for sure, but Dale and I's part of the presentation is ending.
So Laura's got a question there.
Yes. Hey, Laura. So what are some ways that you determine the specific variations you want to examine? So, for example, in coaching, it seems the variation can be about candidness of the conversation. So that's a good question.
So the variations really sort of hinge on that component. So it's the component and the description of, the behavioral description of the key component itself. And then really it's about how the individuals that we're working with, how they in their local context maybe craft and describe those variations. I'm not sure that I'm answering Laura's question.
Well, I mean, it really be depending partly on what the group wants to emphasize, what they want to focus on.
Which is, again, that's another nice thing about IC maps is it recognizes the contextual nature of, the influence of context on change, the influence on context on implementation, and, it is allowing some level of adaptation based on that local context.
So, Margie, to your question, I've spent lots of hours doing logic models as well, and I think they're actually sort of very related, whether they're cousins or sisters or brothers, I'm not quite sure. But for me, logic models really tell you the steps you need to go from, let's say, point A to your outcomes. So, including preparing for the reading program. What are your inputs and things like that? The different things that would be required to do the reading program. And then actually assessing the quality of the implementation would be where the IC map would come in. It could be sort of one dimension of a logic model. Not necessarily your outcomes either, because your outcomes are sort of post what we are observing in the IC map. Yep. The IC map is really the outputs, I guess, or early outcomes. What exactly are you observing in the classroom? And so I'd like to say that it's sort of potentially another dimension of a logic model that would allow you as an implementer to say, hey, we really have these long-term outcomes or long-term goals. We would like us all to be at this higher level of implementation. One way to see that is this visualization of the IC map. Okay. So instead of in a logic model just saying, hey, everybody does it with high quality, the logic model component could be more specific, and the logic model, in the IC map, could be one way to do that. I hope that was clear. I really see them being sort of married together, at least in my mind, which sometimes I can't always describe everything effectively. But, I think they're very, very related. The logic model is more about all the steps that you go through to make something happen, and then your long-term goals, where the IC map, the logic model is broader. The IC map would focus specifically on the implementation itself and the different ways people are implementing. It'd sort of be like a third dimension in a logic model. That's right, Stephanie.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Stephanie's on there.
So, I hope y'all saw that. So Stephanie's comment was basically that the logic model really thinks about cause and effect. Thank you, Stephanie. That was a lot more efficient than my ramble. And then possible relationships there. And the IC map really defines the practice. Yep.
Oh, okay. So they can only see.
Okay. I think I will copy, save. There we go. So that was Stephanie's comment.
Great. Any other questions?
Good questions. Thanks, Margie. I appreciate that.
Well, wait a minute. Don't pass it yet. Sorry, until we pass it, we're trying.
We promised we'd not talk about passing the blue ball, which we do in WebEx, but now we're trying to pass the ball. So, Stephanie.
Here, we'll just in a way of a wrap-up. Here's our contact information.
Okay, thanks.
So let's do that. So certainly feel free to email us, call us. As Jason said, we're pretty responsive, and we'll get back to you usually within a day, if not sooner. So any questions you have, post-webinar, definitely we're happy to field those. And if you can't tell, we kind of love talking about
Yeah, we do like this stuff. I like this stuff a lot. So,
all right. Thanks.
So the ball has been passed. Stephanie, you.
All right. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Jason. This has been so informative. I hope those of you who are able to join us today found it informative, that you have a good foundation on kind of the introduction to the concerns-based adoption model, or CBAM, as well as the innovation configurations, or IC maps. You have some new acronyms to add to your vocabulary. You can contact them if you have further questions, if you're interested in learning more, if this is something that you think might be useful to you. They are a great resource for information about IC maps. So, as with anything, we would like to have your feedback regarding your experience today. What worked for you, what didn't work for you. When you close out of your WebEx screen, you will have a pop-up screen that will have a stakeholder feedback survey. And if you'll just take 5 minutes to complete it and give us your feedback, it's so important to us. We use it to inform our practice so that future webinars can better meet the needs of participants like you. And with that, I will conclude the webinar for today and say thank you to you all for joining us. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Jason. It has been a pleasure to have this time, and looking forward to regrouping with everyone in Metro Nashville next week. Thank you.